Yep.
All right. So welcome again. So hopefully y'all found all the ingredients. So we, with our bruschetta tonight, we're gonna start with our French bread because we're gonna toast it and roll it in the oven. So if you wanna go ahead and turn your oven on broil, there should be a button on your oven that literally just says broil. You just turn that on and you are ready to go. You're gonna need your baking sheet. So go ahead and get that out and a cutting board to lay your bread on. Do not lay your bread on the table. And you're going to need a bigger type knife. If you have a bread knife at home or like a chef's knife or something like that. I really like something with serrated edge to kind of cut through that bread. So you're going to cut your bread this way. And you're going to want to keep your fingers in bear claw or wildcat claw or however, just so you don't cut through that. But it's going to take a little bit of force and you're going to cut it all the way across. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not even cutting it very evenly, but if you can try your best, that's what you need to do. And that just helps it cook easier. Okay. I'm going to pull it apart so y'all can see. You're going to cut it across. Leave it together though, and now you're going to make it, think about not bite-sized pieces, but pieces that are going to be easy for you to, big enough for you to put your cream cheese and all of your fruits on there, and just slice down through there. So I don't know, that's probably 2 to 3 inches. It's kind of what bites at the first bite. And just keep cutting. Keep your hands back, hold the back part of the bread together. I know the recipe calls for, I think, 24 pieces, and you may not get that, and that is not a problem. And as you can tell, that piece kind of fell off, and that's okay as well. So as you get here to the end, make sure you're using that bear claw to hold the piece of bread still. Keep your fingers back out of the way. Especially this last piece here, I'll kind of turn it where you can kind of see, you know, make sure you're keeping those fingers out of the back of the way there. All right, so once you get all of your bread cut on your baking sheet, just cut out of the way. And you're going to open up your pieces of bread because we are going to put these in the oven. So, put the flat sides down on your baking sheet. We're going to put them in there for about 5 minutes. Then we will flip it over and toast the other side because you're going to want to go ahead and toast both sides. As you all can see, some of my pieces aren't very big, but it'll be okay.
Julie, we have a question.
Yes.
What if someone is substituting and using the English muffins instead?
So they'll just need to slice those English muffins in half and they're going to toast them as well.
Just on one side?
We'll flip it over just so it's kind of got that toasty even.
Okay. So Julie's going to put hers in the oven, and then as soon as yours are ready, you can go ahead and put it in there too.
And then set your timer for 5 minutes is what I did at home. If you think everyone's oven, I know is a little bit different. So if you think your oven might cook a little quicker, then you know, maybe set your timer for 3 or 4 minutes. And you're just wanting it toasted. You're not going to want it burnt or anything like that. Just a nice little toast. Make sure you use the pot holders because you don't want to burn yourself. And the broiler is on the top. It's like the top of your oven is where
The broil feature may be something some of you have not done before, but just know it cooks very quickly. So when you're using the broil feature, it's not something that you want to leave the kitchen and run do something else for. Because if you forget about it and you come back, you will have a burnt product, whatever you've got in that oven. So you always want to stay very close by when you're broiling.
And since we're going into our fruits next, you could use that same cutting board. Just take your crumbs to the trash can or the sink and just knock those off. And you can use the same cutting board that you just sliced your bread with. I'm just going to go right here at the sink and just knock it off. Now, if I was cutting this and then that was meat, and then I was just cut my vegetables, no, I would put that cutting board in the sink and start with a whole fresh cutting board. But since it's just bread and fruit, you're going to be okay. There's no cross contamination going on there. So the next thing I'm going to do is we're gonna start prepping our fruit. Go ahead and open up your can of mandarin oranges. Hopefully you got it in the mandarin orange juice. I don't know if you went with your mom, dad, whoever they went grocery shopping. Sometimes you can find mandarin oranges in light syrup, heavy syrup, or in the juice. And you want the juice just in the mandarin orange juice because that is cutting down on your sugar intake with those. So if you have your can open, get you a colander. You may have your colander. I'm going to kind of be using 2 different colanders that we gave you all in your all's packet, and just go over here to the sink and drain your mandarin oranges. Don't wash them off or anything like that. Just drain them in the sink. I'm just going to pack a towel and bring them back over here. So the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to work on is your all strawberries. So we got the strawberries from Jackson's Gardens in Franklin or in Simpson County. Is where we got those from. They are gorgeous berries. They are very tasty. They're summer berries, as Catherine's youngest daughter called them, is because they've got a nice flavor. So with me, I never wash my strawberries until I've done capping them and cutting the bad spots out. So I kind of want to show that to you. You're supposed to have a cup. Obviously I didn't get out a cup. We're gonna eyeball this because you're gonna know how many strawberries you want, how many you don't. But same thing before, you're gonna do the bear claw, and I'm just using the little paring knife that we gave you all, I think last time. And you're just gonna cut right next to that stem. You don't want to cut away a lot of your berry. So can they see that? Or?
No, you're good. You're good. And remind them how long they're broiling the
so,
bread.
I put mine in for 5 minutes. Okay. That's what I did at the house. So if you think yours broils a lot sooner, then maybe you just need to do 2 to 3 minutes.
The recipe says just a lightly,
Yeah.
So I wanted to just throw that in there.
And a good way is keep that oven light on. That's a good way to keep an eye, pop in, check on your bread to see if it's toasting too fast.
And you don't want to ever open up your door. And actually, this oven may work. Oh, this oven here works a lot faster than mine at my house does. So my 5 minutes is not up. It went for about 3 minutes and 40 seconds. So I'm going to pull it out. So stop what you're doing here. You're going to just stop, pull it out. You're going to turn it over and you're going to put it back in. Use your pot holders. And I'll show y'all what we are looking for. Use your tongs. And then, I don't like this set of tongs, so I'm going to do another set of tongs. I won't touch it because it's hot. Can I see that, Catherine? Kind of what you're looking for?
Yep.
So that's kind of the toast you're looking for. So now we're going to flip it over and make the other side look exactly the same. That's part of the reason why we're doing this first, is because you want your bread to cool before we put the cream cheese and the fruit on there, because if not, the cream cheese will just run off of your.
So even if you put your bread in after Julie did, go ahead and check it. Flip that oven light on and at least give it a check, because every oven is very different. And broiling, again, it's a very fast process because you've got a high temperature really close to those heating elements. I will say broiling can sometimes be a really quick way to set off your fire alarm, is one thing that Anna mentioned, because your smoke detectors, that's right. If you walk off and you leave that in the oven too long, it's a high temperature. It's really close to those heating elements. It will not take long to burn what you've got broiling, and also to create some smoke and set off those smoke alarms. So Julie has turned it over and she's put it back in, and another 3 minutes?
3 minutes is what I set on my timer.
Okay.
So then after you get done, then you can go back. So I'm going to show you demonstrating these strawberries again. So bear claw, just cut off the end up there just where the cap's at, because you're not going to want to, you don't want to keep the cap, but you don't want to cut off a lot of your berry either. Because if you're cutting back here, you're going to lose all of your berry. So you may have to kind of move your knife with the leaves a little bit till you get in there. So. And they have bad spots, like this one kind of has a bad spot in it. So I'm gonna cut the cap off, and then I may hold it down just a little bit and just kind of slice it that way to get that bad spot off. Cooking, as I said, I can get a 1 cup measuring cup out, but sometimes cooking is just kind of estimating as well. I mean, obviously I don't want to estimate on a cake that we're going to do or anything like that, but with this fruit that we're going to do, and I think even Anna's going to do a little bit of estimating tonight as well with making this. So just slice your tops off, and then I always wash. I don't know why. If you don't normally do that, you don't have to, but I just always slice my tops off, and then I wash my berries. Check my bread here. Oh yeah. So I am done. And once you get done, you can just turn off your oven. You can just set, if you've got a cooling rack, obviously we've got 2 different stoves. So set them on a cooling rack. I'm just gonna leave this sit on top of the stove because Anna's gonna use the stove top here. Obviously you're not gonna be able to do that at your house if you've got, for you to Anna's recipe. So you'll need to sit on another pot holder or cooling rack and let it cool. So I'm thinking I've got about a cup of strawberries. So I'm gonna put these in my colander and I'm gonna go over here and wash my strawberries. All right. So with your strawberries, after you've got them washed, put them back down on the wipe that off.
All right, there we go.
So with the strawberries, they're not flat. So we're gonna make them flat so it's easier to cut these up. So with your strawberries, with your bear claw, you can do this a couple of different ways. A lot of times I'll put my fingers on each side of the strawberry and then I just slice down the middle. So I don't know if they can see that or not, Catherine. They kind of see what I did there.
Oh yeah, you can see.
This one's got a bad end on it. But, so I'm gonna do the same thing.
And I noticed some of our strawberries, because those were picked on Monday, trying to keep them until Thursday night is a pretty long time for fresh berries. So they may notice that some of theirs are starting to get some soft spots, some bad spots. Again, fresh berries are best to use them within a couple of days of picking, but you know, when we're doing a program where we've got to get it to 3 different counties, we didn't have a lot of
Time, and then also
options there.
For y'all to pick them up. So just slice your berries in half, and then we'll go back in here and we'll dice them. After you slice them in half, you're going to kind of slice them in half again, so you're kind of making the force, but leave that together. And then you're going to go back and you're going to cut. So cut it hot dog style, and then you're going to cut it like hamburger bun. And keep those fingers back out of the way, and you're just going to make little tiny, think bite-sized pieces. So I don't know if y'all can see this.
Yeah,
or
I can
not.
see.
But you're going to make, you're going to want your bites to be about that size. So again, slice it in half again, hot dog ways, and then just hamburger style. And remember, you're just wanting a cup of strawberries. So I've got a cup of strawberries already. So that's about what a cup's going to look like. So set that out of the way. If you've already drained your mandarin oranges, you can go ahead and put those in with your strawberries as well. And then we'll talk about an apple. So with your apple, same way. So an apple you cannot slice because it is not flat. So you're going to pinch on both sides. Not my favorite knife to use, but you're going to slice it down the middle. You're going to need something bigger than that paring knife that you all just had. And you're going to slice it down the middle, and then you're going to lay it on the flat side. And this one's got wash your apple. Sorry, I washed my apple before I started. So before you slice your apple, make sure you have washed your apple, but I washed it earlier. Never cut towards yourself. And it's got a bad spot, so we'll cut out the bad spot here. All right, so we all know it's got a core. No one likes to eat the core. So slice, look down and kind of slice in the middle again. So we can work on getting that core out of there. And it's going to take this whole entire Granny Smith apple. We'll do the same thing over here. And so I've sliced it through the core. Now here's where I'm gonna take my paring knife back in at, and you're just gonna cut where that core is at. That's all you're going to cut out, is just that core. And it may take a couple slices depending on how thick your core is. This core is a little bit thicker, so I'm gonna have to lay it back down. After I get rid of all the seeds. And I'm gonna cut that core again. So now I've taken all that core out because that is not going to be very tasty. So once you have all your apples cored, you can go back to your paring knife, is what I'm more comfortable with, and we're gonna slice these in, I call these finger cuts, I think, just small little cuts, because you're gonna dice them up. So you're not gonna want them to be very big.
Kind of like a sliver.
A
That's
sliver,
what we call
yeah.
it, yeah.
So keep that fingers back out of the way and just cut your slivers. And you may need to turn it the other way. However is most comfortable for you to. So once you have it a quarter, I got about 5 or 6 pieces out of it. You can lay 2 of them together if you want to, and then just do small little cuts. And so the slices are going to look about like that. So, and you're going to do that with your whole entire apple. So once you get the apple, we're going to pause here, but you can kind of stir your fruit, mix your fruit in together. So you do have a pretty nice little colorful fruit salad here that you're going to use. And I would also go ahead and recommend getting out your cream cheese so that it's a little bit soft when it goes to spreading it as well, because when you first pull it out, it's going to be kind of hard. So if you want to go ahead and set it out before you start cooking with Anna so that it's ready, so you can spread it on there after you get done. So you probably not going to want to wait till after you get done eating supper tonight with your tacos. But what you're going to do is you're going to use your cream cheese. Take a knife and you're just going to spread it on your toast or your French loaf. And then you're going to get a little scoop of your fruit. You can kind of top it there. It may all want to stay. And then it's optional on there is honey. We did not provide you all with honey this time, but you all will be getting honey from us in the coming months, because we have a couple more recipes. It's calls for actual honey in the recipe. So if you have honey, you can put it on top. Last night, my sons ate it without the honey on there, but then you can just take a little bit of honey and just drizzle it over the top. And that is what your fruschetta is going to look like.
All right, knowing that several of you all are probably finishing the last of what you're chopping on and setting it aside, as you all are doing that, I'm just going to simply start talking about what you need out in the kitchen. So what materials were you asked to have with you? Some of those materials and equipment are going to include, you're going to need a skillet. We're going to be cooking on the stovetop with our beef. You're going to need maybe 1 or 2 spatulas. You may want several knives. Today I'm working with a chef's knife, just a larger knife, and also something smaller to make some smaller cuts. Additionally, I have a spatula that may come in handy when we're working with our canned good items. I have several sets of measuring cups today. You'll be measuring, like for instance, a tablespoon of olive oil. I also have with me a quarter, half, and a full cup that I have set out with me. Additionally, I have a colander with me. I have a cutting place. I have a cutting board, which might be which is really important. Today I'm working with the green one. We're just gonna be, even though we're cooking with beef, we're not gonna be doing any cutting. So we're good with just a green cutting board. You may or may not want a few of those to be available. I also went ahead and grabbed a few bowls for the kitchen as I prep several different things I may want to be able to place and set aside some of my prepped items. So I have 2 glass bowls to help me with that. With that being said, we're going to be going off the recipe today, and I'll tell you a little bit about the food items we're gonna have, but we are gonna be tweaking a little bit just because we're cooking together as a large group. So there's several things that as we're cooking together might be a little bit more helpful, since we have some of you all that are a little newer to the kitchen and some a lot more experience, to make sure that we get our timing all down. Some of the food items that you're going to be preparing with today, and here in a second, we're going to pull my ground beef from the fridge, but we have cilantro that we're cooking with and an onion. Today I'm working with a white onion. It did call for a red onion. Most onions are pretty equal. The red is a little bit sweeter. We'll be doing corn. Today you could use corn on the cob, or you could use canned corn. Either option works. We'll be cutting up a tomato. Of course, we're going to be working with our fresh lettuce. Today's lettuce for this week's lesson came from Needmore Acres, which is out of Scottsville, Kentucky. They produce a lot of veggies that are actually help to provide fresh produce for both Allen and Warren County schools, if you didn't know. Additionally, we're going to be working with zucchini. We're going to be working with some brown rice. You may or may not, like I said, choose to do corn by the can. We're going to have black beans, tomato sauce. Today, we couldn't find lime juice, just short, but there's no substitution for having a real lime. So both work really well. So we'll be doing a real lime today, and our taco seasoning. So it could be a variety of different companies that produce that. And then we have olive oil, and you'll want to have all those items out. And your recipe, if you want to follow along with your recipe card or this little fun booklet that you got in this last kit, that's what I'm going to be working off of today. So today we're going to be prepping several things. The first step actually calls for you to wash your lettuce. One small note before we get started too much, and then we'll be pulling the ground beef from that's currently sitting in the fridge right now. But we're going to prepare our rice in advance. So it did call for 1.5 cups of rice. So I've gone ahead and prepared that. It's set back there, just kind of chill in my pot right now. If you haven't prepared your rice, I'm going to go ahead and give you instructions on that. It's going to possibly, depending if you have a quick rice, I'll give you 2 sets of instructions. If you have a long rice, if you look at the back of your instructions and it says something like 40 to 45 minutes, I recommend you go ahead and get your pot of water, fill it with about twice as much water as you're going to be putting rice in. Go ahead and set it on the stove top and set it to boil. So that's if you have a long cooking rice, something that reads probably 40 to 45 minutes. If you have something like a minute rice or a quick rice, you may look on the back of the instructions and it says, oh, it's going to cook in 10 minutes. If that's the case, I'm going to recommend you folks hold off to cooking your rice till very last. When you're getting ready to plate it, then prepare your rice, because it already called for 1.5 cups of cooked rice. We're going to go ahead and wash our lettuce. So you all received a head of lettuce from us. Once again, it was from Needmore Acres. Now you've got several pieces of lettuce that are on here. What I'm going to recommend is kind of survey who's eating dinner tonight. And based upon how many are eating dinner, that's how many I'm going to recommend you pull lettuce off for. Also, a little tip that Miss Anna learned when she was preparing this lettuce is I'm actually going to say for each lettuce taco, I'm going to recommend you use 2 pieces of lettuce. Reason being is it can get a little flimsy if it's just one, and by the time you've got your meat, your rice, everything on it. But in the end, we're going to end up pairing 2 pieces of lettuce over each other if you prefer, just completely optional, which will allow less of that the good stuff to fall off. So plan for at least 2 pieces of lettuce per each person eating. You all have lots of lettuce here today. So we're going to just kind of peel backwards. As you can tell, you probably have dirt on your lettuce. guess what? That means that it is nice and fresh. And we will be washing that in this very next step. So at this point, I've got 3 folks that are eating with me tonight, maybe 4 people. So I'm gonna pull off 2 pieces of lettuce for each of us to have a taco. I'm gonna turn around here to the sink, and in my colander, we're gonna rinse these. And then you're gonna take your lettuce and you're going to lay your lettuce on your paper towel. And depending on how many pieces of lettuce, ideally you probably don't want to stack them because the goal is for this lettuce to be mostly to completely dry in the end. It may take a few pieces of lettuce. I'm going to transfer that to the back counter, a space where I'm not using a whole lot, just so it's out of my way, because it's going to continue to dry during the rest of this process. So I've got quite a few pieces of lettuce, which you very well might have if you're cooking for a larger group of people in your family. So just at this time, you have rinsed your lettuce and then you're laying it out on a paper towel, or if you've got a clean towel, that's perfectly acceptable too. And then I'm transferring those on the paper towel. Cutting board does a great job of helping me transfer it without spilling it to a counter space that I am not currently using actively at the moment. So at this point, hopefully you plucked off your lettuce leaves, you got them washed, you set them to dry. You don't have to worry about dotting them. We may dot them dry later on, but we've got several steps, so we need to continue to go ahead prepping several other items. So step 1 was to wash and dry your lettuce leaves. If you haven't already, once again, make sure that rice is going. If you were the long brown rice person, more than likely your water on high is getting close to boiling. Once it's boiling, keep an eye on that, or have mom and dad keep an eye on it, and add rice to your pot once it starts boiling. So just keep an eye on that. Roughly, you're going to need 1.5 cups of cooked rice. That looks like a lot of different things based upon the brand you purchase, but you're going to want maybe like a cup and a half of dried rice, because that conversion ratio is a little different based upon the brand. But get your rice done. We're going to go ahead and move on. Hopefully everybody's caught up on that lettuce, and we're going to move to cutting the corn off the cob. Now, several of you all might have decided to cheat and buy corn in a can. And if you did, I do not blame you one bit. But for today's purposes, I am going to demonstrate with cutting off the cob. Today I'm going to use a smaller paring knife, something a bit on the smaller side. We will be washing this on the back side, so you don't have to worry about washing it on the front side. We'll go back on the back side. Remembering our bear claw technique, we're going to keep our fingertips down, and we are going to, in this instance, when cutting off the cob, I have got the corn cob kind of sitting out on its butt, and we're going to cut down. It's a little bit more difficult laying parallel with the counter, but you can do it. So we're going to turn it on its side, and we're just going to slice down. As you can see, making sure my fingers are out of the way. I didn't place my fingers any lower until I was done making that first little cut. My fingers are plenty away from the corn cob, but I've made one cut and have lots of corn off of it. Then I'm going to just keep changing the direction that my corn cob is, and make sure you got a good hold on that corn cob. And we're going to be just cutting it off. You're cutting pretty close to the cob there because we want to capture as much of the corn as possible. If you're getting some resistance, that means you're probably too close to the cob. Just kind of back it towards the back it away from the cob a little bit, and then proceed to cut. We're going to need a total of, on our corn, I think we needed 3/4 cup. So it may take, we'll measure it up here briefly, but if you've got a cob like what I've got here, it's probably going to take most of that cob to accomplish. So, that's another recommendation. When I prepared this in the past, the can of corn is going to be a little bit more than 3/4 cup, which is what you need. And the beans are going to be about the same situation too. So you're welcome to use the whole can. You're going to have a lot more corn to your ratio, but that's acceptable as well. I've just measured out 1/2 cup. I'll swap to my 1/4 cup because we're going to do it to a T today, and then work on my 1/4 cup. So this right here is, I put a 1/2 cup in. in my colander, because we're going to be watching that in another quarter. Because I have so little here, it's okay to ad lib and be a little creative with your recipes. Because we have so little, we're left over, we're going to go ahead and add that in. That's only going to add to the diversity of our recipe that we are preparing. So after you've got your 3/4 cup, whether you took it from a can or you took it off a corn cob, you're going to be rinsing that. So we're going to turn around. I'm going to make sure, because we're rinsing several things, to take the bowl that I'm going to transfer it to with me, so I don't have super wet corn dragging all across the kitchen. Next, we're moving to our beans. So our beans, we're going to be draining into our colander here. So this step, because I have a nice pull tab, I'm just going to do that back at the sink. You may need a can opener. We didn't necessarily say that in our instructions, but if yours doesn't allow for that, make sure to add that to your step. And we're just going to simply drain the entire can. So with the beans, you need 1 cup. So I'm going to take once again, my solid measuring cup, not quite the same as a liquid measuring cup. And I'm going to transfer, and you can use your hands here. I'm going to transfer 1 cup into my cup. But I want to do this because I want to also show you that even though I measured out 1 cup here, I still have just a little bit more beans left down in here. So just like I did with the corn, I'm actually going to take the entire can because my can was pretty close to a cup already. So I'm going to transfer that into my prep bowl as well. Okay, into my prep bowl, and set that colander aside and set my beans up here. So hopefully you've got 3/4 cup of corn and a full cup of black beans that we have rinsed both of those. This is where we're going to divert a little bit from what the instructions say. The next instructions talk about starting to brown your beef. Because we're going to be juggling several things in the kitchen at once, I just want to focus on cutting everything so we don't have a hot item that we're all trying to be on the same pace with. So we're going to continue to prep the rest of our items. So essentially it did already call, and you might have already pre-prepped it, but it did call for 1 small zucchini chop. So we're going to be preparing that. It also called for cilantro, 1 tablespoon of cilantro to be chopped. It called for 1 tomato chop and 1 small red onion chop. So that's what we're going to work on now. I'm going to leave that onion for last just because it has a very strong taste. And I'm going to start, and tomatoes are really juicy. That's why I'm going to be a little intentional on what I want to chop up first. So once again, we're going to be chopping our tomatoes, we're going to be chopping our onion and our cilantro, all of which are kind of messy. So I'm going to start with my zucchini first. It's the least messy of all those items. You can either work with a large chef knife or a smaller one because you just want to work with something that at least goes the depth of your blade. Chef's knife is going to be a little easier for me. So once again, bear claw, holding that zucchini really tight. I'm going to cut off both ends. All right, and hopefully you've pre-washed your zucchini. If you haven't already, go ahead and take that step, or you can wash on the backside. Either way is perfectly fine. So with our zucchini, we're gonna want kind of smaller slices. This is a slightly bigger zucchini, so I've decided that I don't need quite this much zucchini for my recipe. Okay, this end's pretty large on my particular zucchini, so I'm going to set it aside. That may serve great for another recipe that we're working with. I'm going to start by creating coins, if you will, and I'm going to make my coins about 1/2 inch thick because we're not going to want massive pieces of zucchini, because ultimately your zucchini is going to be cooked down with your ground beef. It's going to be cooked down, and we don't want it to kind of outweigh the beef or the corn or the beans that are also going to be in there. So I've got those sliced at about 1/2 inch thick. Then I'm just going to, there's a variety of different ways, no right or wrong way to do this, but I want my slices of zucchini to be relatively small. We're dicing at this point because I don't want it to overwhelm. I don't want massive bites in my ground beef. So that is why I'm just kind of cutting it in kind of a pie method, if you will. I'm literally have 1 slice, my 1/2 inch slice. I'm cutting it in half, cutting that portion again down the other direction. So I have like 90-degree cuts. And then I'm making a total of 8 pieces out of it, but you can do as you wish. Don't overthink it. We just want smaller pieces of zucchini. So I'm preparing my zucchini now, and hopefully you are along the way. If for some reason you didn't have zucchini, but you wanted to prepare this with squash, you could. I really like squash though. I know we've talked a lot about different alternatives, things that you could swap it with. If you had squash at home, well, not quite the same, you could prepare it with squash too. So we're cutting all these slices up. And if you find that you've got some bigger slices, you can cut those down to size a little bit more as well, because these are not going to be in the skillet for terribly long with the ground beef. So that's another reason we want them to be a little bit smaller in size too. If they're too large, then it'll take a little bit longer and they're going to be more firm. So that's why the smaller pieces are nice. Now, several of you all might still be catching up with me. So what I'm going to do in the meantime, not a required step, is I'm going to use a cutting technique where I place my hand on the end of the chef's knives, and I'm just going to dice it a little bit more. What's important and what I try to really encourage my 4-H kiddos is the nose of that knife never picks up. That's why this is a safe technique, is you leave the palm of your hand placed on the end, the upper end of this knife, not near the point, but upper end, and you are just using your dominant hand to take the knife up and down. You'll notice that the end of my knife, other than picking it up to relocate it, does not move any. And I am just lifting with my dominant hand to help dice it up some more. So hopefully you all are near done cutting your zucchini up. Just want to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page with us. Great. I'm going to slide this on over. And even then, we're going to end up adding several of these things all at once. So I'm going to be honest, because I'm going to be limited on space and I don't want to wash up a whole lot of dishes, my corn and beans is going to go in at the exact same time. So I'm going to slide my zucchini, because I have limited space, on top of my bowls with my corn and beans, because they're all going to get tossed into the skillet at the exact same time. So you're more than welcome to do that as well. In order to kind of keep us moving, I'm going to go ahead and start with our next one. Like I said, we're going to be cutting cilantro, we're going to be cutting onion and tomato. My tomato I am going to save for very last, because it's going to be messy, and that cilantro, once you've got it diced, gets everywhere. So I'm going to move on with the onion, even though it is a little stronger. With our onion, once again, using that chef knife is probably most ideal. It's a firmer produce item. We will be pulling off the paper off the onion. So there's really no right or wrong way to do that. You can make your first end cuts and then pull off your paper, or you can do it the other way. No right or wrong way. But the outside thin component around your onions is referred to as the paper of the onion. So we always peel that off in advance. And because I'm working with a yellow onion, that brown outside paper reveals a very white looking onion. White with a little bits of print. Anytime you're working with most produce, for the most part, you always start by cutting both ends of the produce. So that's what I'm going to do. Once again, using my bear claw technique, where I've got my fingertips placed down, no fingertips out, placed down. I'm going to use my chef's knife, and I don't have to take a lot off of it. But I'm going to cut down and cut one end off, toss that away, and then keeping a good hold on it, cut my other end off. Now, because I'm not a massive fan of onions, I'm going to tell you this, just like I did with the zucchini, it's a very large onion where it called for a small one, and yellow onion has a strong taste. I'm only going to use half of my onion today. That's my personal choice, just because I'm not crazy about onion. And the other folks that are eating with me may or may not love onion. So we're going to work with half is what we're going to choose today. Now I'm going to show you all a neat little cutting technique that hopefully should make your job cutting onions that much easier. We're going to be using a technique before you start where we are going to run slices this direction down the onion. But instead of making a solid cut and literally severing it and we're to the point where it falls apart because we've cut it completely, we're going to make cuts that are pretty close to the edge of the onion, but not all the way. It's going to go all the way through, but we're going to leave about a ½ inch from the very top, and we'll finish that at the end. You'll see why. If you cut onions, it's kind of hard to dice these up, which is what we're going to be doing today. But by leaving a little sliver towards the top, and I'm actually using the point of my blade tip to kind of point that into the onions. Onions are kind of slippery and kind of harder to navigate. So I'm literally kind of poking it in, keeping my fingers far away, and I am working, still not going quite all the way to the top of that onion, pressing my knife in, and I'll show you all here in 1 second what that's going to look like. This is only the first part. And yeah, it gets a little bit harder as these start separating apart, keeping my finger full away from that tip. Now at this point, I have lots of little slivers this way because next is I'm going to go and chop it this way, which keeps all of our onion together and makes that dicing technique a little bit easier. Make sure to keep those fingers out of the way. But when I start making cuts this way, nice and small. I'm not chasing down little bits of onion everywhere because I have created rows and it's held together by this end. I didn't cut all the way through. Now, if you're new to this technique and yours did not turn out that successful, that's okay. It takes a little while to get used to that technique. Maybe one you can try in the future. But definitely one that is worth the time. It'll save you a lot of time cutting onions, actually, if you'll try that technique. And as you can see, as I break it up here, I've got my onions cut kind of small. If you've got family members who don't love onions, cut it smaller and it's a little less noticeable as they're eating. So I'm going to slide my onions. I've got mine cut. I know you all might still be working on those onions. And yes, Miss Anna's eyes are crying.
I would be in tears if I was cutting that onion.
Yep,
right
it
now.
helps a little bit tap
There's
glasses on.
a reason.
Yep. So several of you all are probably still cutting. So I'm going to continue to, like I did with the zucchini, just cut it down some more. Why I know several of you all, and I want to rush you on the onions too bad. So once again, keeping my hand on the top of the blade, not near the end. Palm tip is staying down, and as I cry and cut, don't lose sight of your onions, but I'm using my dominant hand to pick that handle up, keeping the tip down, pulling the handle up and down, and chopping it smaller because I am not the biggest fan of onions. This yellow onion is not quite as sweet as red onions are, so the flavor goes very strong. And yes, Miss Anna's eyes are crying. This was a very fresh onion to the point Miss Anna nearly has tears running out of her eyes. So half an onion will definitely do it. I think that's the worst an onion has ever made me want to cry. This is a good point to wash your hands. Wash your hands. You definitely don't want to try to touch your eyes or touch anything else after you have been cutting onion, and take a paper towel just to get the residual kind of juice off of my cutting board. For the most part, just kind of slid my onions aside because I'm cutting lots of stuff today and just limited on space. So if you've got the ability to, a paper towel might be ideal. And once again, once your hands are clean, keep them clean. If your eyes are running, your nose running, blow your nose, do what you got to do, and then come back after you've washed your hands. You don't want to touch your food. So we've done the onions, we've done the zucchini. Next, we're going to chop up our cilantro. Now with the cilantro, it only calls for a tablespoon of finely ground or finely chopped cilantro. So I am going to pull off. Typically, you don't need a whole lot of the stems of cilantro. So I've got about this much right here that I'm going to be preparing with, and that's going to give me roughly a tablespoon. If you're newer to cilantro, you're not sure, okay, cilantro, what exactly is that? I'm gonna get started with the demonstration. I'll talk some more on cilantro, but my recommendation with most herbs as you're chopping them is to kind of bind them together, just kind of pinch them together, because they're really leafy. They don't have a lot of depth to them. So if you've got them cut together, you may have to slide. It's great if you can kind of rock back and forth on them. On that first cut,
I was just gonna say, at home, when I cut up fresh herbs, I use my shears
yep.
instead of using that. So you can pull out your kitchen shears that we gave you all, and if you don't want to use the knife, and cut them that way. That's how I normally cut it at home.
So as you all can see, I did that first bunch. I cut them, kind of holding them. Then I'm using that same chopping method I told you all about, that finely chopped method, where you've got your hand on the end and you are rocking it, because cilantro is a very strong flavor. Ideally, you want as little, you want small leaves. You don't want massive leaves. The bigger, not a problem. Just means that you're gonna get a big old taste of that. And the more you cut it up, the more you're releasing that flavor.
And some people doesn't like cilantro. We don't use cilantro in our house because some people says it tastes like soap. So my husband
That's a gene.
does not like cilantro. So we
Catherine
don't
does
use it.
not like cilantro.
If you actually taste soapy flavor when you're eating cilantro, it's a gene mutation. So certain people have that where it's not just a dislike, it literally tastes like soap. So maybe you fall into that category. You don't have to use cilantro, but it does give a really nice kind of Mexican flavored dish taste. Cilantro is used a lot in Mexican dishes, Indian dishes, Mediterranean dishes. So I eyeballed it about perfect, if you will. And here is my tablespoon that I'm going to kind of just set back to the side. I know I just picked it up to measure it. Set it back to the side. Take a paper towel. Those are going to be our best friends for today's lesson. As we continue, or if you've got several cutting mats, that's great too. We're just going to try to get the worst of it out of the way. It's really flaky and kind of messy. It's not all out of the way, but the worst of it, because then we're going to come in with a very juicy tomato. So once you've got your cilantro prepared, you're going to be working on that tomato. Once again, we're working with all produce, all fresh stuff. We're not working with meat stuff. You're welcome to wash your knife in between, but because we're working with all produce, we're pretty safe here. Along with all of our others, you don't have to cut the end of a tomato, but I am for today's purposes, not required. But some people think it's a little tougher, so they like to cut it out. So we'll be doing that, and I'll just slice to the very top. It also, by cutting the top and bottom of all produce, gives you a nice flat surface to cut on and less slipping and sliding. You now see my tomato that sits flat instead of rolling around. It's calling for the entire tomato, so I'm gonna just sit it on its bottom and cut all the way down in half, which is gonna give me 2 halves that I can sit down and more easily work with. I'm setting one half aside for a second. I'm going to cut this particular slice, because of the size of my tomato, into 3 rows. You do what you need to. Remember, we're using the bear claw method, keeping fingers out of the way, fingertips out of the way. Your tomatoes are going on top of your taco, so ideally keep these small dices. Keep these small dices. This is when I wish I had those tomato knives we're going to give you all here in a few weeks. Few months.
I was just thinking we needed to do a plug for our right here as you were cutting it. We didn't think
Yep.
about having a tomato knife.
A serrated knife actually is very helpful with a tomato. Helps to kind of cut through flesh like that. We've got a really nice knife that we're excited to be putting in your all's kits here before long, that does a really good job of just cutting through that soft flesh, where sometimes a soft blade just doesn't do it quite the same. So you can always trade out your knives. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, 3 rows on this tomato. And if you're having trouble keeping your rows together, that's okay. There's nothing wrong, no shame in just taking 1 row at a time and cutting it, especially if you think it's slippery and sliding all over the place on you, then please feel free to turn it on its side and just focus on 1 row at a time. Because we want these to be kind of small, terribly big slices, why it's not going to hurt anything. just a little bit more obvious. That tomato taste doesn't spread out quite as well on your taco. So small pieces is ideal. Do a little bit of a harder portion from the core there. So I'm going to cut it out, throw it in the trash, and keep on cutting. All right. So at this point in time, like I said, several of you all might be cutting on your tomatoes. So I'll just, why it's not completely necessary, I'm going to continue to dice mine up a little bit smaller. And I'm going to ask my kitchen folks here to kind of help me out. We're going to be preparing our ground beef next, so that's in my fridge. If I could get some help from Miss Julie, we're going to grab that out. When working with meat products, it's idea to kind of keep those refrigerated as long as possible. They will be cooked, which is helpful, but even raw stuff, we don't want to keep that for too terribly long. Now that we've got all this prepped and you all are hopefully kind of getting on the same page, at this point you have diced up. At this point, just to catch up, you have 3/4 cup of corn, you have a cup of beans, you have a small zucchini, you have a red onion or part of an onion, you have tomatoes cut up, and you have a tablespoon of cilantro. Then we're going to do this next part. Even if you're not caught up, that's okay. With this next part, hopefully you all are grabbing your ground beef out of the fridge, and we're going to go ahead and turn on our skillet. So if you haven't found a skillet, go ahead and do that. The deeper the skillet you have, the better for this recipe, because we are going to be adding several things. So kind of know your surface top. Make sure you're turning on the right burner. That's the fastest way to have a disaster in the kitchen, is not working on the right burner. So I've identified the right burner, where I'm turning it on. We're going to be cooking ground beef, so we want to be at a little bit of a medium-high setting with our ground beef. So we're going to turn that on. We want the skillet to warm up before we place that ground beef. Not quite sure why that is, but there's just meat cooks very differently if you don't prepare the hot surface first. Seems to just take longer. So make sure if you have a second to kind of pause what you're doing, go ahead and turn on that skillet. Make sure it's heating up. And then you can return to finishing chopping the rest of your stuff if you need to. This might also be a good time, if you're done with all the steps that we're at, is to start kind of cleaning up or setting aside some of your dirtier surfaces. Slide things aside, kind of clean up your space, if you will. While that's heating up and while people are catching up, I'm going to talk a little bit about the meat that we have. We did not get ground beef donated, but you can definitely buy a ground beef product locally. If you don't know, or just a reminder, because our kiddos sometimes don't put two and two together, beef comes from a beef cow, okay? Pork or like bacon or like sausage, those are pork items, come from pigs, but we're working with ground beef today. If you wanted to, you could substitute ground, or you could do sausage, but not gonna give you quite the same taste. That's why we're working with ground beef today. Today's recipe also calls for really lean beef. Now, the leaner the beef, the better. We have found actually a 96% lean to fat ratio. And ultimately what that means is once it's ground up, they add so little fat, or it's the fat to muscle ratio. Lean refers to the muscle component. We're going to be going ahead and placing this in the skillet now that our skillet is just about warm enough. Go ahead and place that in. Make sure not to get this little bit in there. Hopefully you hear a sizzle when it places in there. I even probably am rushing mine a little bit to get it in a skillet. Things are really going to start cooking a lot faster here shortly once we get our ground beef going. So ultimately we're working on that. If you have it or you're waiting, one thing you could be doing is checking on your lettuce leaves. Are they dry? If they're not, like mine has a little bit of water that's puddled on top of it while I'm waiting for that beef to kind of catch up with me, I'm going to pat my lettuce leaves dry. So we've got it on. It's running real slow. That's part of it. One of the first things I did last night when I was preparing this at home is I went ahead and one of the first things I do when I'm checking a recipe is determine, am I using the oven? Am I using a stovetop or any kind of special equipment? If so, do I need to preheat anything? Obviously, we're not using the oven today, but we are using the stove top. So when you're ready, be prepared to maybe think a step or two in advance to go ahead and preheat that. But we're juggling a lot of stuff for today's recipe. So once you get your beef in your skillet, you may use a utensil, kind of like this 4-in-1 tool that we gave you in your first kit, and chop it up. Something ideally, a tool that's a little bit more stiffer is how I like to chop up my ground beef to make sure that it cooks really thoroughly. Now, I'm going to kind of tell you all a few options on this. If you have a beef that is truly very lean, like this one is a 96 to 4% ratio, it is not going to create much fat in the end. If you've got something more like an 80 to 20 ratio, it's going to have a lot of fat you're going to want to drain off. So if you did pick up a beef that's a lot fatter, I'm going to either tell you to use this next step or not use this next step, or at least split it off. So this lean beef does the recipe calls for using a tablespoon of olive oil. Because I'm going to be doing several things at once, the olive oil is going to help cook it a little bit faster. If you have a like 80 to, or even a 70 to 30 ratio, you're going to have a lot of fat that you're going to end up needing to drain off. So I'm going to say hold off on the olive oil if you did choose a fattier meat, and then once you get done cooking your ground beef and draining that, then you'll add your olive oil in. Little small step, but it does make a difference, because ultimately when you drain it off, you just lose all that olive oil and have to replace it again. So we are following a recipe because I'm cooking with lean today. So I've got my olive oil here, lots of different olive oils out there. We are placing a tablespoon, same one that I have my cilantro in, is perfectly fine. Okay, so I'm placing a tablespoon here in my skillet. Great thing about any of our oils, fats, substances, whether it be butter, whether it be shortening, whether it be olive oil or other types of oils, it does help as like a agent to help things cook a little faster. So that's going to help with this process a little bit too. So it's going to kind of let it do its own thing. Once this gets cooked 3/4 of the way done, then we're going to add the rest of our veggies that we've already, well, part of our veggies, not all these go in there, part of our veggies into our skillet once it is 3/4 of the way done. So your skillet may or may not cook at different speeds. If you're trying to catch up with us, you can turn your stovetop up a little bit higher, but beware, you really got to keep a close eye on it if you're going to do that. And it typically zaps it of moisture a little bit faster. So what's going to go in here next? Yes, we've prepared a lot of things, but before everybody starts dumping veggies in there, we want to make sure we get the right ones in the right steps. Your tomatoes, cilantro, and onions. These are going to hold off for just about your last step. What you're going to be putting in next is you'll end up putting your zucchini, corn, and your beans in the skillet. So we're not quite ready yet until you are seeing your meat 3/4 of the way done. And what does that mean? Well, when our meat is completely done, we're looking for meat that's completely brown all the way through, all the way through. I still have a bit of red. I'm going to say that I'm even probably at the halfway point. So here before long, I can add my other veggies to it. If you add it too early, it's not the end of the world, but it has a little, the ground beef has a little bit harder time finding the surface area of your pan in order to do the browning that it needs. So sometimes it'll cook a little bit longer if it can't find that surface area. So I'm about at that 3/4 of the way point. I've got mine turned up a little bit so it's cooking a little faster. This is one we might separate in speed. You may be cooking a little bit slower here, and that's okay. These next steps are really simple. So if you're not quite there, don't rush it. It's fine. But
Yeah, you might want to remind them if they've got the higher fat beef that they're going to need to drain
Yes.
it before they
And
put the
once
veggies in
again,
there.
like I mentioned, if you do have a really fatty beef, don't add that olive oil in. Make sure to drain it. And at that point, you are going to take it, you're going to cook it pretty much all the way or most of the way done. Drain it in your sink, not directly into your sink. Most people will pour it into a glass bowl or something like that because it gets really hot. Plastic cup, it will burn. A new technique I've seen here lately is people place a large piece of tinfoil and kind of gently, without breaking the tinfoil, kind of press it down into the drain area so that when you pour your meat in there, it puddles. Your hands aren't at risk of being burnt. So that's a good way to possibly do that as well.
I was gonna say at home, with mine, talk to your parents, but like I use a big dinner plate and put several paper towels
Okay.
on it, and then I pour the hamburger meat on it, and it soaks up, the paper towels that soak up the
So
fat.
to be honest, we all have super different techniques we've learned from different folks in our family. Now I'm gonna go ahead and add in, it's gonna get really colorful and really pretty, our zucchini and our corn. Another little zucchini that's sitting here on my beans. Add my beans in here. This is why I said you might want a little bit of a deeper skillet because we're still not even done adding stuff to the skillet. So hopefully, if you find that your skillet is just not deep enough, maybe reduce the amount of veggies that you're putting in there. You can always cook them up in a separate skillet and add everything all at the end. I know a couple of times I've underestimated how much can fit in my skillet. I do that all the time in the kitchen. If you have a lid with your skillet, now's a great time to top it off. This is going to help while you don't have to. When we place lids, when we're cooking with a skillet, helps to trap that heat and give a little bit more of an oven effect where you've got heat coming from the bottom, but because we placed a lid on it, it's helping to cook more well-rounded around everything. If we didn't have a lid, not the end of the world. But the heat escapes, whereas now the heat is being trapped and it allows it to give a more thorough cooking. As we're cooking things like zucchini, we want that heat to be trapped and help kind of steam it, if you will, a little bit. Now, you don't have to stir it every second. That's why we want to leave the lid on. But every minute or two, because we don't want the meat or anything to get stuck to the bottom, we'll pull the lid off and give it a little bit of a stirring. I cooked mine for roughly 5 minutes on the stove top last time, and that was about what I needed to have done. So everybody's might be cooking a little different. What we'll be doing next is we'll be adding a few other things. We're going to be adding our taco seasoning, and we're going to be adding our tomato sauce. Don't add these quite yet. This is a time while it's cooking, I want you to kind of take a look at your taco seasoning and at your sauce. Pick those up, take a look at it, because this recipe does call for less sodium, even though you don't have to. But it calls for 1 ounce, which will be located probably in the bottom right corner about the quantity. So it's 1 ounce of seasoning, and that's what the recipe called. Mine that I picked up last night had like 1 1/4, 1.25. So it had a little bit more than I needed. So I didn't use the full packet. With the tomato sauce, this actually has 8 ounces in it. This particular can does, and I only need 4. So I want to preface it by saying you may or may not need the entire amount that's provided to you. If you put the whole thing in there, it's not the end of the world. Yes, I'm checking on mine. I'm giving mine a little bit of a stir.
I was gonna say, you may also want to preface that we're using the whole entire pound of ground beef, where the
Yes.
recipe only calls for 3/4 of a pound of ground beef.
Yeah, that was a decision we made beforehand. We said we love ground beef, so and because we're cooking for several folks, we wanted to go ahead and cook the entire pound, and that was our choice. But if you went with 3/4 pound, that's fine as well. So we've stirred that. We're about the halfway point. When you're cooking with that, you may end up even taking a spoon, even a really basic like teaspoon that you eat your meals with, and actually kind of spoon out a little bit. Test a few pieces. Go ahead and dip out, zucchini. Is it cooked the way you'd like it? Piece of corn, piece of meat. Are those cooked thoroughly? Meat should tell you if it's pink, it's not ready. But your beans, most of those you could eat raw as is. So even if we stopped right now, we could eat it. It'd be maybe a little bit firmer than we might like. So that's why we're going to give it another minute or two before we take care of the rest of it. In the meantime, we're going to give it about 1 more minute. Most of you all probably bought lime juice, but if you didn't and you're like me and you bought a full lime, this next step and you're like, okay, well, how do I get my lime to a juice? It's very simple, folks. This next part is we're kind of just talking and waiting on our skillet. We're actually going to use the palm of our hand and place the lime on a hard surface, and we're just kind of rock and roll it. We don't want to do so hard that we bust open the skin surrounding the brine, surrounding the lime, but for the most part, it's pretty tough. The lime is. You'll have to put quite a bit of pressure if you are using a lime to kind of not only just kind of beat up the flesh on the outside closest to the brine, but even get kind of to the inside too. So we're just rolling that on a hard surface. I'm really excited about the flavor that this lime and cilantro is going to add to our recipe. It's going to definitely give it a Mexican flavored dish kind of taste to it. If you're not sure about it, it's okay to kind of set it aside and just try it on a bite or two of things. At this point in time, our lime is prepped and my skillet is ready to go. So our next step, now that everything's kind of cooked how I like it, is we're going to be opening our seasoning packet. And I'm not prepared with this set of scissors, but we'll get it here in 1 second. All right. Another way, I'm going to use this knife just to very safely open it. That's where a lot of danger in the kitchen comes, is when people don't safely open it. So at this point in time, I'm going to open up my skillet, dump my 1 ounce of seasoning in there. Okay. This next step, just a particular for me, I'm going to stir in my seasoning before I put in that tomato sauce, just because I want to make sure that that seasoning really coats that ground beef especially pretty good before I get that sauce in there. We're almost nearly done. Almost nearly done. And then placing that lid back on for a second. Then I'm going to need a can opener. We're going to open this tomato sauce here.
Our camera crew was wondering, that's what we were looking for.
Is giving me the weird look, like, what? I hadn't got quite there yet. Hopefully, if you're lucky, you have one of the pull tab ones. I don't think they do that a whole lot of tomato sauce, to be honest. They typically do that on more items that are ready to eat as you go. Like, for instance, Miss Julie probably had a pull tab on her mandarin oranges, just because you can eat those as is. Same thing with my beans. You could eat those straight out of the can if you wanted to. So they typically do it that way. While I'm waiting, I'm continuing to stir. You might already be done. If you are ready at this point, look at that can of sauce and you're going to put 4 ounces in. And more than likely, you have a really big can or you have an 8 ounce can. So in this instance, I'm going to use half of this. So kind of just think, okay, how many ounces? If you have a 16 ounce can, that's a quarter. That's you know, not half, but half of the half makes a quarter, which would be 4 ounces. And then here shortly, I'm going to go ahead and grab some of my lettuce, because before long we'll be ready to plate up. So now that I have my can opener, yes, I believe I do. These are the fun ones where you just kind of have to keep twisting until it grabs. All right, so we are opening my sauce can here. This is where my
Turn it back the other way.
and then it's got a nice little gripper on this one. Help me.
Here.
Yep, we're good. We're open. All right, folks, I'm going to pour half of this in. About half of it. Cooking is a little bit of an art. Doesn't have to be an exact science. Baking is a little bit more of an exact science. You add a little too much of something, baking, you can go wrong. Most of the time with cooking, for the most part, it's a little bit of an art. All right, folks, and you have it here. That's what we're finishing up on the skillet. We are done with our skillet, so we're going to turn that off. I'm going to push that over to a burner that's not active. Remember, if you push it off of a hot burner, remember, this is still hot. Don't get anything around it. Next up, we're pretty much ready to plate it up. So whether you add your rice or you add your meat in whatever particular order is completely up to you. I've had my rice that I pre-cooked and set aside. Once again, I was cooking on this burner. This one's fine. Got my brown rice here, or you might choose to do a white rice or more of a Mexican rice. And I've got my dish here. So I'm gonna do a little bit of sliding around so the audience can kind of see as we start to blade it up. All right, so here I chose to double up my lettuce leaves. You do not have to do that, but if you really like tacos, unless you're gonna get super, super messy, doubling up your leaves might be an idea. If we didn't say already, if you have really long stems on your lettuce, you may find that you want to cut it down a little bit. And that's something that you can do at this step. You don't have to have done it earlier. It's okay if you did do it earlier. Mine last night had really long ends on it that weren't quite as desirable. They don't eat up as well. So I've got them placed here. Now is the fun part. Now I get to plate it. So I've got my brown rice here that is done cooking. I will warn you, if you overstuff your tacos, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle a little bit. So I'm going to recommend, even though I know you want to dump a ton of rice and a ton of meat and all these goodies on your tacos, you might overwhelm it. Start with a little bit less and then maybe go from there.
You're supposed to add lime juice and cilantro to your rice before you put it on there.
Good catch. I cooked mine a little different last night, so good call. You can add that lime juice really honestly in the cilantro, even after you've finished. If you don't, you get out of step a little bit, all those flavors get added to it. Because you may have some families, I did separate that step because maybe not all your families like lime or cilantro, which is why I think it's nice to actually just keep that lime and cilantro separate, and the family member can add it if they want, is what I'm going to recommend for you all. So you can add it to the whole dish if everybody likes it. If they don't like it, maybe keep it separate, because at this step, I can squeeze my lime on here as much as I want, and per family member can kind of tailor it a little bit. Then I have my cilantro here, and I like cilantro, but not everybody does. So maybe start with a little less and then kind of grow. And you can really do any of these final things in any order. You're not going to go wrong at this point. So then we have our meat sauce here. So we're going to add, remember, don't overdo this step. It's kind of, you might be eager to just put a whole ton on here, a whole big dollop, but start a little bit smaller, and maybe add to it. All right. The last step calls for adding your onions. So I might top mine off with a little bit of onion on top. Not the biggest onion fan, so I'm not going to pull a lot. Then I'm going to add some tomato on here. Now, everybody loves their tacos a little different. So some other options, while it's not on the recipe, if you love cheese, if you love sour cream, if you love avocado on yours, feel free to add any of those things that you would like to your taco. But at this point, folks, once you have put your rice on there, you added the lime and cilantro if you want, you followed it up with our meat combination there, and then add your onion and tomato as desired. Then folks, feel free to add cheese or sour cream, but this is it. This is the leafy green taco. A lot of work, but I promise you here in a second, when you try it, you're gonna love it. So don't forget to take pictures with your finished product. So before you devour all of it, make sure to take pictures with your final products, both for the Frechetta and with the leafy green tacos. We do want to give you just a few reminders, and then Miss Julie is going to talk about those plants that we gave you. But don't forget, don't tune off quite yet. A few more things to cover. Our next meeting is going to be June 9th. We're going to meet once again at 5:30 via Zoom. Same link we've been using, but don't forget that, and stay tuned, because right now Miss Julie's going to talk a little bit more about those plants and how we're going to prep those for our lesson down the road.
Okay, so y'all's probably wondering how you all was going to eat this lovely little basil plant or the tomato plant when you pick them up from the extension office. But the reason why we give you these is multiple reasons. So we're wanting you to learn these cooking skills, but also remember that these come from a farm, and you all are hopefully going to raise things from July. Our July meeting, hopefully your tomatoes are going to be ready. Your basil is definitely going to be ready at that point. So you all have Roma tomatoes is what you all have. In your buckets is where you're going to put them. So you will need to get you some container soil, whatever type of soil you want to do. But depending on where you got the buckets at, you're going to want to make sure that they have drainage holes in them. Some of the buckets you may have already got about an inch up is where you're going to need to measure, and about, you need to do 4 around. Put in 1 inch drill bits in the side of the bucket. So make sure you've done that, because you've got to make sure that there's drainage in your, with your tomato plant. As it's getting bigger, which is getting close, you're going to need to stake it. So this is a bamboo shoot, I think that Catherine said that you can get at the Lowe's. There's like 24 in that thing. So you can get that with it, or you can use, you know, if you have a tomato cage, you can do that as well. Last year I had one of my 4-H members. He entered his in the fair. He had an arrow because he's in the archery team that broke that he could no longer use. So he just used his arrow to stick it up. But you'll stick it down in there. You'll tie it up with some string, some twine to make sure that tomato keeps growing up. Because as it gets bigger, it's going to get heavy and it's just going to fall over. So make sure you stake your tomato. Now with your herb, your basil, the best part about this is this basil is about ready. Actually, it is ready to eat. And basil is going to get bushy. So to help it keep getting unbushy, that's probably not the right word to use there, but you can go ahead and harvest. So where that was at, there's little leaves that are coming up. You can go ahead and take off these leaves right here, wash them, and you are ready to chop up your basil to put in with some vegetables that you may have at home. You may have some meat that you want to put it in. A lot of times I use my basil. I can smell it where I've been touching here with the oils. So just go around when it starts getting big, you've got those other little leaves underneath there. You can go ahead and break those top leaves off and start using your basil. So your basil will be ready for you to use actually now at home. You have different recipes, those types of things. So is there any questions? The pots that we are giving you with the basil already has a hole in the bottom, so they will be good to go. Make sure definitely with the tomato, it needs to be out in the full sun. Probably, especially since it's in a bucket, it's going to need to be watered every day. This, you need to leave it outside, or you put it in your windowsill. It does not need to be in the full sun, or doesn't have to be in the full sun. So make sure you keep those in there. We also included information about your tomatoes. So if you start getting insect damage, or if it starts producing and then for some reason it's not wanting to give you flowers, or it's not wanting to give you tomatoes, you know, contact us. We can talk to our horticulture or our ag agents. Same thing with our basil plants. We can hopefully help you out if you see the diseases.
So we've had a question on, can you freeze basil? And typically with herbs, you dry those.
Yes.
Was there in
There
their
should be a
kit,
book.
was there a
Yes,
book
there's a
on
booklet
drying herbs?
About drying herbs, and
Okay.
that kind of thing. And you can actually, that's another fair project. Both of these you could enter in the fair. And then also drying herbs is something that you can enter in the fair as well. So look at that, but I've never froze herbs. I've always dried
It's
herbs.
intended to be dried. So for the most part, unless it's freeze dried, through my kind of research on that, it's really simple, folks. Take it by the stem. When you're ready to harvest it, bind the stems together, place a brown paper bag around it with a hole at the top to where the stems are facing out and the bulk of the leaves are hanging down. Allow it to dry until it's completely dry. Then you can chop it, store it however you will, but it does need to be dried. They do not freeze very well because it's a leafy product.
All
right.
right. Is there any
So-
other questions?
I know that we have gone a little overtime tonight. We picked a recipe that there was a little more to it than some months, but you can see our finished product. I'm going to kind of zoom in on that. And both of these recipes make quite a bit. So hopefully everybody has got plenty of supper and lots of anxious people
So
ready
just
to
remember,
enjoy it.
our next meeting is June the 9th. If you know what, May is beef month, so we use beef this month. Obviously, we didn't give you beef, but May is beef month. Does anybody know what June is the month of?
Any guesses on what?
If you can guess what it is,
commodity?
well, it'd be a good hint of one of the commodities you're going to get next month.
Okay, we don't have any guesses.
Well, it also goes moo, but we don't get beef from it. We get milk from it. So June is dairy month. So we will be giving you all Chinese milk as part of our recipe, because the recipes, both recipes will be using milk in them. So
All right, we're gonna end this and let everybody go enjoy supper with their family.
all right.
Don't forget to join us next on June 9th at 5:30.